Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. With summer officially here, the sports universe will start to cool off a little bit, but not too much to where I'll have nothing to talk about. Ha! You know me, there's always something to get off my chest when it comes to the world of competition, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard, and for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And yes, for those watching on Spotify or even the YouTube channel, I am rocking a tank top. Not only is summer officially here, thank goodness, but my apartment's got to be 1,000 degrees. I can't put on the air conditioner. I don't want to have the air filtering into the microphone and through your earbuds, headphones, or speakers. Same with the fan. So I got to rock a tank top. So I'm not trying to flex or trying to look cute here. So I just wanted to throw that out there for starters because it's going to be anywhere between 96 to 100 today in New York with the heat index about 105. And tomorrow it's going to crack 100 with the heat index almost up to 110. So you know I'm basking in my glory that the best season of the year, the most wonderful time of the year has arrived. And of course, that being summer. But with that being said, let's get right to it. And we finally have an NBA champion crowned after 2.5 weeks, 17 days. And it's weird because for as many years as I've been watching the NBA Finals, and this dates back to 1980, 79, and prior to that, I did not watch fully. But 80, even with tape delay, and on CBS back in the day where the finals, depending on what game it was, you had to watch either late at night or you did get a live broadcast. But I can't recall, especially over the last, let's say, decade plus, where the NBA has stretched its final schedule over the course of 2.5 weeks to where this one finally came to a conclusion, where this one seemed like it took an eternity. Because think about it, from Game 6 Thursday to last night, it might as well felt like 3 months, let alone 3 days. And that's just yours truly. And I couldn't get enough of what had transpired, considering, and I'll go back to Thursday night before I get to the overall theme, because Thursday night, it seemed to be almost a coronation from a lot of factions of the NBA world, even sports talk world, where they thought Indiana, with the magic carpet ride that they've been on, and we've chronicled it since day one of the postseason, how they're going to go to OKC and how it's going to be competitive and how it's going to be a thriller, a nail-biter to the bitter end, and I didn't think that was going to be the case. Which now concludes this theme of the NBA Finals, 7 games. People want to deem this a great NBA Finals. I'm sorry, people, it was not. And even last night, it was on the verge of becoming what could have been an epic Game 7, a classic Game 7, despite the fact that Tyrese Haliburton went down 7 minutes into the game, and of course, I'll talk about that in a little bit. But even when the game was tied with about 8 minutes to go, and you thought to yourself, oh man, this is going to be juicy, this is going to be what the sports fan wants, who knows what the rating's going to be when it's all said and done, and then it just petered out, it just went kaput, and pretty much fizzled into a fourth quarter that was interminable, and it took forever to complete. As a matter of fact, I think they just finished about 5 minutes ago, and the confetti starting to come down from the rafters of Paycom Center. So I'm not trying to be a spoiled sport. I'm not trying to be a David Downer by any stretch. But that was one that even if you're Adam Silver, and yes, I'm sure a Game 7, even if it didn't end out in a high note as far as drama, intrigue, etc., but you're still going to be happy when you wake up this morning knowing that it went to a 7 game and at least it was competitive for the most part. But with all that being said, to recap, Game 6, what's there to talk about? OKC goes off to a 10-2 start, and you thought to yourself, ooh, the Pacers may be up against it. Granted, it was early in the game. But then the pivotal point came at the, I believe, 8-minute mark of the second quarter, 34-33, and that's when the Pacers went on their run to the tune of a 22-point halftime lead. I think it was, 64-42. They left the Oklahoma City Thunder in the dust. SGA had probably his worst game of the year. Jalen Williams, after that 40-point performance, was a no-show. And granted, Indiana was flying. Indiana, you knew that they were going to come out of the gate fast and furious. And even though I thought that the Thunder were going to win that game, because I thought they were going to fool around, even though I know it was going to be a bit of a challenge, But because they turned the ball over like crazy, on top of them shooting poorly from three, that was the recipe for disaster when it comes to the Thunder there in Game 6, to where the Pacers just went going away. And Obi Toppin was the guy that led the charge with 20 points, even though Tyrese Haliburton was in the game 23 minutes, had 14 points, made an impact there offensively, especially during that second quarter when they went on that run. And then OKC had to regroup, come back home. And as I mentioned, the 3 days that felt like 3 months between Game 6 and Game 7 led to last night. And a lot of people thought, again, we were going to see a nail-biter, we were going to see a thriller, and we haven't seen a Game 7 since the 2016 final, which obviously was epic in its own right. The 3-1 comeback by the Cavaliers over the Warriors, the 73-9 regular season team, you know the whole deal. So now we get to last night. And all I can say about the game last night was that I thought at halftime, now with Haliburton getting injured, that was beyond crucial. And he got up to a great start, was 3 for 4 from 3, had the 9 points. And then when he fell to the floor there where the ball went the other way, and I believe they got a dunk, then you see Haliburton banging on the floor, and you thought to yourself, oh, it can't be his Achilles, can it? And when they came out from a commercial, upon seeing the replay, the first thing I thought was an Achilles. I mean, how could you not, considering we've seen that with Damian Lillard and Jason Tatum earlier in this postseason? But when the key point and the focal point was, I wanted to see how he got carried off. Was it a situation? Was it under his own power? Did he have to get help? And sure enough, when you saw he had to get help into the locker room with towels over his head, you knew that he was finished, especially for the game, but even more so, most likely, for next season. So that put a pall on the early part of this game, to where I wonder how both teams were navigating their emotions throughout, more so the Pacers than the Thunder. And as it was, the Pacers seemed to play well. They actually had a 1-point lead at the half, and it was a situation where at that point, considering that SGA was pretty much the only guy that was contributing, I understand Alex Caruso with some defense and a couple of three-pointers, but where was Chet Holmgren? Where was Jalen Williams? Where was that 40-point performance you saw in Game 5, now back home, to where he was 2 for 7 for 5 points in the first half? And what I wrote on social media was, if the Thunder do not get out of this game alive, and especially if Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren are going to wake up and realize they're in a Game 7, they were going to be culprits number 1 and 2 as far as why they did not win this title. And it would have been just a flat-out disaster for this Thunder team with everything they did in the regular season, the defensive metrics, etc., that they were just going to be a no-show here in this final game. And as it was, the key point at 56 up, where the Thunder had a 5-point lead, and then they came back with a quick little flurry, capped by Miles Turner's 3 to tie the game. That's when it started to change on a dime. You had back-to-back-to-back three-pointers by SGA, Chet Holmgren, and Jalen Williams, where they called a timeout. And then TJ McConnell went on a heat check to where he was unstoppable. He actually scored 12 straight points to have the comeback to where they were down by 4, 70-66 there late in the third quarter. But between that period, a 19-2 run, which then ballooned to a 22-point lead, and then that was pretty much the game. So from 70-66, it went to 89-68, and then 90-68 at one point. That was the biggest lead by the Thunder in the game that last night, where I believe it was now bled into the fourth quarter. And at that point, it was almost put your feet up and let's see if the Pacers had a run in them, in which they did. But it wasn't anything to where you thought the game was going to be in danger for the Thunder. It was a scenario where the fourth quarter, as I mentioned earlier, was interminable. A lot of fouls, a lot of stoppages. It just ruined the fourth quarter of the game. And I understand that you felt the Pacers were going to make one last charge, but again, they were not a threat to where you were shaking in your boots if you were a Thunder fan or even an NBA fan, thinking like, oh wow, the Pacers have cut it to this deficit. In fact, I don't even think they cut it to as close as 6. 2 possessions there at the midway or even later part of the game. So you were just waiting for the celebration to start, and it didn't really start until about 22 seconds left when the OKC, when they brought in their bench players and the Pacers called off the dogs. And as it was, very anticlimactic to a Game 7 where a lot of people were anticipating a game to the bitter end. And that's pretty much it. SGA is your MVP. I understand we're going to talk about the historical context, not only with him, but also the team in a minute. But it was an NBA final that, let's face it, to be nice, it was slightly better than good. And that's it. Game 1 came down to those final minutes, a 9-point lead with 2.5 to go, where the where the Pacers won, and the Haliburton jumper that changed the trajectory of the series, at least early on. Then the Thunder blew them out in Game 2. Game 3, competitive the first 3 quarters before the Pacers outlasted them in that fourth quarter, outscoring them 32-18. Game 4, very competitive. SGA trying to drag his team back to OKC. And those 2 games were pretty good. But then Game 5 was a blowout disaster. Game 6 was a blowout disaster. And then Game 7 was looking to be a classic until that stretch, tied at 56. The 3 3-pointers, 70-66, but then a 19-2 run, and then that was the game. So for those who are going to say, oh, that was a great NBA final, it was not. I'll say it was slightly better than good. End of Game 1, because Game 1, it was pretty much in control by the Thunder until they fell apart there late. But I want to say Game 3, Game 4, okay, fine. 5 and 6, Game 7 for 2.5 quarters, fine, but then that was it. So I don't want to hear this being in the annals of one of the great NBA finals of all time, because that is far from it. And that's just a fact. I'm not trying to throw cold water on it. I'm not trying to be that person that is the curmudgeon, the old man, get off my lawn. Oh, you want competitive series? Go back to the 84 finals, Lakers Celtics in 7. Or even Heat Spurs 2013, the Ray Allen shot, and it was a very competitive Game 7 to the end where Tim Duncan, if you remember, I think they were down by 2 and he missed that layup there late. We could talk about all the Game 7s and all the 7-game series throughout, but last night is not going to go down in the history books in my eyes as one of the great NBA finals ever. That's number 1. Now, number 2, let's talk about the Thunder from a historical perspective. SGA, I know he's one of 4 players, Kareem, MJ, and I believe Wilt, to not only win the scoring title, win a regular season MVP, finals MVP, and an NBA Finals. So congratulations to SGA. Had a phenomenal year. He's a very unassuming star player, even superstar you want to call him. Yes, you finally see him break that smile. And let me tell you, the Pacers threw everything in the kitchen sink. They wore him down. And even though he fought through it, and at the end of the day, he's the last man standing, winning the MVP trophy for the finals, as well as getting his first ever ring. And to be in that same sentence with those players for this year, you got to give it up. Now, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't as if he had an MJ-esque 32-point per game performance where he dominated throughout. That was not SGA. He had his flashes. He had his moments. And yes, he did win the MVP. But this isn't going to be historically ranked as one of the all-time great performances in finals MVP history. I mean, look at Dwayne Wade in 06. Now, I understand you want to say Bennett Salvatore and the refs got involved, especially in Game 3. You could argue that. But Dwayne Wade had a finals to remember, especially those last 4 games. SGA is not going to rank with that final or anything else close to what we've seen here in the finals. And again, it's just what I've seen, what I watched. Other people may argue, but we could argue it back and forth. He did not have an epic final. Look at the game he had in Game 6 and what would have been a closeout game and was a complete no-show. You want to say the Pacers in their defense, turning the ball over, the crowd, etc. All right, fine, but if you're going to be in the annals, and he already is in that same sentence, I get it. But he was not a dominant figure game in and game out throughout this finals. So that's calling it as I see it. Now, as far as the team overall, we understand that they won, what is it? Do the math. 82 games this year. Have that wrong? 84 games. The 68 regular season and the 16 in the postseason. And of course, you saw the graphic there yesterday. Only 2 teams had more wins than them throughout the whole year. That was the 16 Warriors, where they only won 15, and in 73 they won 88 games. Then of course the Bulls team that went 72-10, and at that time they won 15 games because the first round was a best of 5, not a best of 7 back in the 90s. So the Thunder are ranked 3rd overall. Now, who knows? Maybe 25 years from now, people are going to look back on this team and say, oh, yeah, they are one of the top however many teams based on how many wins. All right, fine. But is this team better than the 82-83 Sixers? They are not. Is this team better than the 85-86 Celtics? They are not. Are they better than the 87-88 Lakers? They are not. Are they better than the 76-77 Blazers? They are not. We could go through a lot of these teams. And yes, I get it. They had the 3rd most wins in the history of one season, regular and postseason, that the NBA has ever seen. But does that make them an all-time team? Maybe in the eyes of some. And I understand you can't compare teams of the past, but I'm sure, to a man, for those who watch and follow the NBA, as I mentioned from the very top, I've been watching the NBA since 1980, and historically since forever. This team is not going to stack up with those teams. I'm sorry. Yes, the amount of wins, they're third overall in the history. I get it. But you mean to tell me that if the 85-86 Celtics are a step below or a cup below the 2024-25 Oklahoma City Thunder? I mean, who are we kidding? They barely have a second option other than SGA. And as it was, thanks to Jalen Williams, who made a contribution in the second half, and Chet Holmgren defensively, obviously turned the fortune of that game around with the turnovers that the Pacers had, and that was the recipe for disaster that the Thunder had in Game 6. That's what happened to Indiana here in Game 7. And yes, we can talk about the defensive metrics and all that, but they are not going to be ranked as an all-time team. I'm sorry, not in my eyes. They're just not. When we're talking about champions, forget about the records, forget about how many games that they won throughout the regular season and the postseason. We could talk about that till we're blue in the face. But to me, that is, What matters is the team that was constructed that year. And when we're going to look at the history of the sport, even 25 years from now, yes, they did win a title. Yes, they're the youngest team to win a title since that 76-77 Blazer team led by Bill Walton. And no matter how you slice it, no matter how you want to cut it, dice it, etc., to me, they just don't rank in the annals with those teams. I'm sorry. And I'm not saying that as an old head, as a guy that's watched the NBA for decades, but I'm sure you could ask many other people who have been around the same time as me or even longer, they're not going to put this Thunder team with those. I'm sorry. So for the 25-year-old, do your homework. Take a history lesson or two when it comes to the NBA and take a look at those teams, and you'll see why I'm coming out with a statement as such. Now, as far as the next thing, dynasty. Now, we talked about that with the Florida Panthers last week when they won a cup. Now they won 2 in a row. Chances are they may be going for a third. Obviously, we're not going to have to wait. We're going to have to wait, until we get to April next year. Now, we know the Thunder, young team, pretty much going to be intact. We know who the cast of characters are, and we know how hard it is to repeat. We haven't had a repeat champion since those Warrior teams after they lost in that 73-9 season, the 17-18 teams led by Steph Curry and, of course, Kevin Durant, who's going to be the next theme here in this NBA segment. But for a dynasty, can we just wait to get to next year first? Let's see what they do next year. If they win a title, then we can start to talk about it. And understand they're going to be the favorite to go to a final and maybe win next year. And with the way things have broken down as far as the Eastern Conference, with Haliburton getting injured, with obviously Tatum's injury, among others, and we're going to talk about the Pacers in a second. But right now, it is just a little bit too premature to start talking about them as a dynasty, despite the fact that it is on their side. Youth, their championship window, they already got one in the books. They certainly erased what happened last year. Not that that was a big, giant piano off their backs, because they were a 1 seed last year and they got ousted in the second round. Yes, they could wipe that away. They could wipe everything else away as far as what happened in 2012 with KD, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden losing to the Heat. And even 2016, you want to talk about Game 6 Clay and not being able to get to a final that year. But yes, all those little demons have been exercised in Thunder lore. But I'm not going to say, oh yeah, let the dynasty begin, because anything can happen. Injuries, people are going to want more money, get traded, who knows? And Sam Presti, I know they got more picks on the way, I get it. But I'm not going to all of a sudden put this team in dynasty mode as of right this very second. If this time next year, God willing, alive, breathing, and doing what it is that I love, they win another title, then we can start to talk about it. Because then the next point is going to be, can they three-peat? And if they three-peat, now we're going to talk dynasty. But right now, I am not going anywhere near it. It's not even to be brought up or discussed. So for those who are going to start thinking that today or even last night when the game was over, then you know what? Find another narrative, because wait till next year in order to talk about this. Because if they don't win a championship, then you can forget about it. And I don't want to hear 3 and 4 years and all that nonsense. Not this guy. So that's what you have with the asterisk and the deal with the Thunder. Congratulations to them. Now, as far as the Pacers are concerned, obviously the injury was just a death knell for this team. And I don't want to hear about asterisk either for the Thunder winning a title. They won fair and square. their player got hurt. What more can you say or do? All right? So I don't want to hear from the Pacer fan or NBA fans that, oh, well, they didn't win the title legitimately because if Haliburton was there, it would have been a different story. We don't know that. We're never going to know that. But don't all of a sudden just think that because Haliburton, with a hot start and him getting hurt, that automatically that the Pacers were going to win this game or it would have been a nail-biter with 2 minutes to go. We're never going to know that. So therefore, injuries happen. We could go through a history of situations of people getting injured in pivotal games and, oh, well, it would have turned out differently. And the first one that comes to mind is Jason Tatum. And no, not in the Knicks series that they lost to in the conference semis. Let's go back 2 years ago when they were down 0-3 to the Heat, and they came all the way back to tie the series and had a Game 7 in their building. And in their first offensive possession, he turned his ankle and was not the same player and hobbled on that ankle the rest of the game, and they ended up losing by whatever it is, 104, 90, or 86 or whatever it was. I literally lost by 19. I think it was 103-84. So what? I'm going to use that as an excuse to say, well, oh, they would have won the Eastern Conference if Tatum was healthy? Nonsense. You can't look at the game that way. So I don't want to hear about asterisk. But back to the Pacers. Now, we think it's going to be an Achilles. I know Tyrese Haliburton's father came out and said that it is an Achilles injury. I'm sure it's a rupture. You saw the game last night, and obviously I detailed it earlier. And if that's going to be the case, he's going to be done for the whole year. Now, yes, it's an 8 to 12 month window. Who knows? He's young enough. He's 25 years of age. He could probably come back, but you certainly don't want to risk and rush him to come back just for the sake of having him ready prior to the playoffs and then try to go on another playoff run. You got to look at it as he's done for the whole year. Same for the Celtics, as I talked about last month. But that is a huge blow, no matter how you slice it. And they have a couple of free agents going into this year. The big one is Miles Turner. I would think he'll probably come back, but who knows? Maybe he's looking for one big payday elsewhere. That remains to be seen. But they have other guys, whether it's Tony Bradley. Other than Turner, they don't really have a big guy that's going to be off the books this coming summer where they're going to have to re-sign other than Turner. But everybody's intact. The Siakams of the world. Haliburton is signed through 27-28, although he's not going to play next year, so we think. And Aaron Nesmith is going to be on the team. So everybody's going to be pretty much the same team minus Haliburton. But are they going to be able to supplement his loss with a couple other players that they could get maybe through free agency or through a trade? Who knows? Similar to what the Celtics may have to do here if they want to compete in an Eastern Conference where, as we talked about, is going to be wide open, as we all know. And right now, the Knicks have to be salivating, but they don't even have a coach. Because the Knicks are the one team that right now is going to be healthy going into next year, because with the situation regarding Indiana, Boston, Philly with Embiid, you never know his health from one day to the next. Giannis, if he's going to be out on his way out of Milwaukee, that remains to be seen. And yes, Orlando, they bring in Desmond Bane, but now does Orlando shoot themselves up to the top 2 or 3 teams in the Eastern Conference? A little bit premature. Cleveland, with everything that they did in the regular season, they bottomed out in the second round. Do you trust them to go on a deep playoff run? Not this guy. So who knows what's going to happen here with the Pacers and what they do as far as their personnel goes. So it is going to be a wide open, big giant question mark for these teams going into the postseason. In particular, Indiana just coming off of this finals run as to what they're going to do to try to get the pieces in store together to see if they can run it back and get to the same point that they were just last night. But it's I don't want to go as far as saying gut punch, but it's a tough pill to swallow. Considering the magic carpet ride throughout these first 3+ rounds to get here and to get to this point, to a Game 7 and lose, it's heartbreaking. It really is. And especially when you lose your best player. But I think the Pacers will be back. They have a deep enough team. They have a good enough team to go restart it and get themselves to a point where they may be the favorites coming out of the East. But we're going to have to see what they do here in the offseason to fortify that and to give us any reason or belief to think that they could get back to an NBA final and maybe win it next year. So that's what you got. But they gave it all they had. They were a team that were valiant in defeat. There isn't anything else I could say but throw the bouquets at them. They did just a masterful job. I picked OKC to win in 6, and look, they took them to a 7th game. A lot of people thought OKC in 4 or 5, so they certainly look even worse than I do. So kudos to the Pacers and everything that they did. I understand no moral victories, but you certainly had a season to remember. And unfortunately, with Haliburton getting hurt and not capturing the title, it's going to be remembered as the one that, I'm not going to say got away, but the one that you had in your hands but just were unable to secure. Now, a couple of quickies. The big one yesterday prior to Game 7 was the Rockets and them making a big trade where they get the services of Kevin Durant, who has 1 year left on his deal, but I would think they're going to extend him for 2 more years, who he is eligible for a 2-year extension, I believe anywhere between $120 to $124 million. He's going to be 37 in September, so it is a little bit of a high risk, high reward in that regard. But this is a trade that I think bodes well for both teams. I'll start with the Phoenix Suns in this case because Jalen Green, again, a young player that they could go in the backcourt with Devin Booker, a guy who has a lot to learn. And hopefully he learned a lot here in his playoff season where he had 38 points in a big game too, but certainly could not find his way throughout the rest of that series against the Warriors, and certainly has a big giant learning curve to see if he's able to do that in Phoenix, to go up against the likes of Devin Booker, who obviously has been to an NBA final, and kind of push the reset button on that team where who knows the situation with Bradley Beal. Obviously, he's owed a lot of money, and there's no way they're going to be able to unload his contract. That's why Kevin Durant was crucial, because he did have an expiring contract and was a guy that could get something back, and he did get something back with Green. Dillon Brooks will add some attitude and a little bit of experience, and they have 5 second-round picks over the next however many years it is. So I'm not going to say that the Suns made out, but listen, they got a decent return for a guy who's still very productive, but is an aging superstar. Now, as far as the Rockets, is this the final piece of their puzzle? Well, it's a big piece considering you plug them in there with Alperen Sengun, as well as Tari Eason, Amen Thompson, guys like that. And who knows? The Rockets could be a big-time contender in the West. But that is a big if because, number one, with Kevin Durant, you got to wonder about his health. He has his stretches where he's out for weeks at a time. So if you're Houston, you hold your collective breaths and hope that he can make it through a season where he plays anywhere between 60 to 65 games and is healthy come the start of the playoffs. But the bigger thing, and we know that he's a scoring machine, all-time great. I don't need to expound on his brilliance when it comes to him on the basketball floor. But this one, as I've said before, after his tenure at Golden State, Brooklyn, and I get it, he was a toenail from going to a conference final, maybe an NBA final, and winning the whole thing. But they fell short against Milwaukee. And then in the ensuing years, they got swept by the Celtics and did nothing in the postseason in Brooklyn. And then goes to Phoenix, where they get ousted by the Denver Nuggets and then get swept by the T-Wolves last year, and then didn't even make it to the playoffs this year. So the big thing is can you trust Kevin Durant at this stage of his career to be a guy that the young players in that locker room, and led by Ime Udoka, who just got a big extension, is going to be one of the highest paid coaches in the sport. Can those two, and remember, Udoka was an assistant in Brooklyn when he coached Kevin Durant back in the late 20-teens into 2020. So this is going to be an underlying story to where, yes, they do look like they could be a contender. They were a 2 seed in the West this past year. Could they approach OKC and being a 1? Are they going to hover in that 2, 3, 4 area with the Denvers of the world, with maybe the Minnesotas, maybe the Lakers? Who knows? Could Golden State all of a sudden shoot up to the top of the Western Conference standings? Who knows? I don't think so. But you got teams that are going to be battling it out for those 2, 3, 4 slots in the West. And that's going to be the big factor, trust. Not only just with his health, but is he going to be a guy that's going to say, jump on my back, I'm going to carry you through this round to the next round, to a conference final, and to an NBA final. Because let's face it, Kevin Durant's legacy, ever since he left Golden State, has been a disaster. He has not come close to being in a conference final. Well, he did come close. He got to a Game 7 in the conference semis, but he didn't play in a conference final. He has not been anywhere successful since he won those back-to-back titles in Golden State. And now, which we would think is going to be the final stop and the final chapter of his basketball life, is he going to be one that the Rockets organization, their fan base, franchise, etc., are they going to be able to lean on him 100% to take him to the promised land? And if you ask me right this very second, that is a big, giant question mark. And it's not a knock on Katie's ability. That's not a knock on what he's done throughout the course of his career, but you have to look at his recent body of work. And his teams have not been able to get out of a first round or even a second round for that matter, and have been swept and not even have made the playoffs. And with guys like Devin Booker and Bradley Beal on the team with a championship coach and Mike Budenholzer in the year before and Frank Vogel. And how's that worked out? And that's not to say that Frank Vogel or Mike Budenholzer should be compared to Red Auerbach and Pat Riley or Greg Popovich for that matter. But he's done nothing on those teams. You got to keep that in mind. So let's see how this is going to pan out once we get to training camp, regular season, etc. So that's the situation with KD going to Houston. And then one last thing, a couple on my part. On the Thursday podcast, I talked about the Lakers going to be bought by Mark Walter. And for whatever reason, I had a brain cramp. So that's my apologies. Hand raised high in the air as far as being accountable. And just a terrible error on my part. But Mark Walter, as we know, of course, is owner of the Dodgers. Part of that group with Magic Johnson, among others. So now that he's going to buy the Lakers, I think he has two of the biggest teams in the sports history. The Dodgers, the Lakers, and he's going to be a part of that. So why did that not compute in my brain? As I mentioned, that Jeannie Buss is going to have now a minor stake of the team, 15%, although she'll still be part of the Board of Governors. But Walter, once it's official, signed, sealed, and delivered, he's going to be the majority owner of the team, but he also owns the Dodgers as well. How did I not even think about it or bring that up? Again, my error there on Thursday's podcast. So if you listen, you wonder, hey, JAYREELZ, don't you know he owns the Dodgers? Yes, I did, but for whatever reason, I blanked out. So one more time, my apologies. All right, now let me turn my attention, get to the ice on a couple of quick storylines and also some acquisitions here as we get to the draft. And speaking of which, real quick, NBA draft, I know it's Wednesday and Thursday, it's 2 nights before I get to the NHL. I don't really have much to add to the draft because other than Cooper Flagg going to Dallas, and I haven't really paid attention to what's happening, just go to my YouTube channel. Wednesday, you'll hear me talk about the draft. I'm not going to have a mock draft. You know me, I don't go through any of that. We know, or we would expect that Cooper Flagg is going to go number 1 to Dallas. After that, it's going to pretty much be, I'm not going to say a free-for-all, but stick to the channel on YouTube at JAYREELZ for the latest that morning into the afternoon when it comes to the draft, any draft day deals, etc. As I'll be on top of it. It's a 2-day event. And of course, I'll recap the first round there on Thursday's podcast when we get to it. Now, officially, lacing up the skates, taking a trip around the ice. For starters, Connor McDavid. Now, July 1st, he is eligible to sign a long-term extension with the Edmonton Oilers. But if you watched his press conference there Thursday afternoon, and this was after I recorded the podcast, so I couldn't really talk about it. But if you watched, and he said all the right things, and I don't think there's anything alarming by what he said, but there is something that could, a couple of things that were mentioned in that press conference that you could raise an eyebrow to. The first one being that he is in no rush to sign an extension, that he's going to talk about it with his representation and his family to kind of see how they're going to navigate this. But that's a good thing when you hear him say that there's no rush. So it's not like, oh yeah, I got to sign, blah, blah. But the flip side of that is that because come July 1st, and even if Edmonton comes knocking on his front door, Stan Bowman, the GM, and the head coach, Chris Knobloch, they can stand in his front door and give him the max money that's available. Because remember, it's a salary cap. They can't give him a 10-year, $400 million contract. So whatever it is that they're going to allot from their salary cap, and remember, they signed Leon Draisaitl the big-time money last year. So whatever it is that they could give him, all the security that he could ever imagine, probably even part stake in ownership, etc., which, of course, that's a stretch. But they could do that at 12:01 on July 1st. And guess what? Connor McDavid will probably still have to mull it over. Now, hockey players are built differently than the NBA and the NFL player. They don't have that player empowerment, although you got a guy like Connor McDavid that could certainly use that muscle and flex it to however it is to his liking. So that's something you have to just keep in the back of your mind. I don't think he would do that. I'm sure there's a part of him that wants to stay in Edmonton, but he's had 2 cracks at a Stanley Cup final, and he even admitted that the Panthers were the better team, especially the second go-around, considering that they lost in 6 games. But there is a possibility, based on that first comment, I'm in no rush. I'm going to talk about it with family, this, that, and the other. That's a bit of a concern. And that's not trying to read between the lines or trying to whatever, but all you got to do is listen to what he's saying, and you could say, all right, well, he's in no rush, and he's going to talk about it with family. He's saying the right things, but I don't know. But the second thing was the one that was really one to keep on your radar once you get to July 1st and beyond. When he was asked over the next 3 to 5 years, which was presented to him in that press conference, as far as the window of this team, considering he just came off of 2 Stanley Cup Finals appearances. Do you like where the team's going? Do you like the direction, the growth, etc., that you feel over the next 3 to 5 years you have that opportunity to win a Stanley Cup? And all McDavid said was, I'm just looking forward to next year. I could care less about, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he did say in that vein, I could care less about what's happening after next year. Which makes you think, does he just have next year to play out his contract and that's it? Is he looking at next year as being the year that hopefully they could bring in enough talent, goaltender included, to make another run at this and maybe win a cup and then move on to greener pastures? Who knows? But that is going to be the big storyline heading into this offseason. And obviously I'm not in his brain. And based on what I've been able to read and gather here over the last 72 hours plus, that it is right now unknown. The only person that probably knows is his wife and maybe his parents, family, etc. And of course his representation. Besides that, it is a mystery. So that is going to be one that's going to carry us into July, August, and beyond, whether or not he signs on the dotted line. And obviously the longer this takes, the longer you're going to think that he's going to look for the exits next year. Because, again, if they're going to throw and back up the Brinks truck in his garage, and if he's going to put a pause on that, that is going to be telling. And then you have Jonathan Toews, the longtime Chicago Blackhawk captain who has not played over the last 2 years because of that illness that he had, that inflammatory response syndrome where he had these issues with his body and was also dealing with long COVID on top of that. Now, with him not playing and with his contract running out, he signed a 1-year deal with the Winnipeg Jets, 37 years of age, and he's from Winnipeg, so he goes back home. Hopefully, he'll have one big season where the Jets, as we all know, they were a President Trophy winning team this past year. They made it to the second round of the postseason before losing to Dallas, as you know, in 5 games. So let's see if he could bring a lot of that experience, those Stanley Cup rings with him to Winnipeg to see if he could be that final piece. Now, I'm sure a lot is not expected, and I'm sure the expectation level of him playing a full season coming off of this condition is going to be a bit of a stretch, but he's going to add a lot of experience, a lot of presence, and a lot of know-how into that locker room. So what they're going to get out from him is going to be a wealth of everything. So obviously a lot of time between now and training camp, but that is a signing that I'm sure he is very happy about, and I'm sure the organization is. How much he's going to be able to give him, that remains to be seen. But for Jonathan Toews, happy for him to go home, and let's see how that plays out the 1 year he signs in Winnipeg. And then you had a couple of other transactions. Matt Duchene will stay in Dallas 4 years, $18 million deal. And then the Stars traded Mason Marchment to the Seattle Kraken for a couple of draft picks. And Marchment, big player, forward, 6'5". His dad, Brian, was a defenseman, long time, in fact, played in the Winnipeg Jets, was an enforcer before, unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. But Marchment now goes to the Pacific Northwest, to where Andre Burakovsky played on Seattle, gets traded to the Blackhawks for Joe Veleno, who is a forward, and for Burakovsky, who's won 2 cups in the past in Washington and then in Colorado, where his best season in his career was in Colorado, the year they won the cup, where he had 22 goals, 61 points. So let's see how Burakovsky's going to do there in Chicago to bring that experience, to bring a guy that knows his way around winning in the locker room. So that is a nice pickup there for the Blackhawks. Let's see how that works out for them once they get the season rolling with Connor Bedard, etc. And as we all know, with the NHL draft coming up this, I believe, Friday and Saturday, which it usually is in the last part of June, as I said on Thursday, and I'll say again, the New York Islanders are on the clock. And I'll talk a little bit about what direction they may go as the team that has the first overall pick. All right, now let's get to some baseball, as there's quite a bit to uncover as I get in the batter's box and dig in to see what's happening. I got to start off, unfortunately, with the Mets because they were losers of 6 in a row, actually 5 in a row, going into the final game against the Braves where they ended up losing. And then, of course, they lost the first game in Philadelphia, a battle for first place in the National League East where they were tied going in Friday night. And for the Mets, who got plastered 10-2, although the game was 2-2, and then it fell apart late there for the Mets. And then on Saturday, they finally snapped the losing streak, hitting 7 solo home runs, which I believe matched an MLB record. And they go on winning 11-4. And then prior to yesterday's game, they send down Francisco Alvarez, who was one of the players that had the 7 home runs in the game Saturday night. Struggled offensively. He's actually regressed, considering he hit 25 home runs 2 years ago on the Mets squad in 2023. And now let's see if he could go down to the minors, start raking, and then come back up and come back into his 2023 offensive form. But then last night, with Dave Peterson on the mound, arguably their best starter, and even he wasn't enough as the Mets lose 7-1. Now, I was dialed into the NBA final game, so I didn't really have to watch the game and how it played out. But, of course, the Mets, even with Lindor hitting a home run, and obviously it was far from enough as the Phillies take the series, they take back first place, and now the Mets struggle to get out of Philadelphia with a series win and up the turnpike back home for a quick homestand, 4 games against the Atlanta Braves before they go to Pittsburgh over the weekend. And over the next 4 days, or these next 4 days, they will not see Chris Sales on the IL with a fractured rib cage, so they won't have to worry about seeing him as they shut him out there on Wednesday night in the middle of the game of that sweep that the Braves were able to take care of the Mets there in the middle of last week. So for the Mets, let's see if they can exact some revenge on what happened last week and maybe at least win 3 out of 4, if not sweep the Braves before heading to the Steel City. But not a good weekend for the Mets. They've now lost 8 of 9, struggling here. Now, granted, they're just a game behind the Phillies. We'll go over the schedule in a minute. But let's see how the Mets fare after a 1-5 road trip and a lost series in Philadelphia, which certainly does not look good heading into this week against the Braves. And it's going to be hot, as I mentioned at the top. You're going to have temps cracking 100 tonight and tomorrow, or near 100 with the heat index, but you're going to get 100 as far as temperature tomorrow, and then you're going to get low to mid-90s there on Wednesday before it cools off a little bit on Thursday. And then they bring up Hayden Singer as the backup to Luis Torrens, who's going to be a starter there as a backstop leading into this week. Now, you had that Dodger-Padres fiasco bleed into Thursday, which obviously first time back on the podcast since then, where you had pitchers throwing at Fernando Tatis Jr., and then you had Robert Suarez throwing at Shohei Ohtani, where Suarez got 3 games and appealed it. So who knows if that suspension actually kicked in. But then you also had 1-game suspensions from Mike Schilt and Dave Roberts, who were jawing at one another near home plate because of the fracas there with both teams, benches clearing, etc. So that's one that we're going to, I'm sure, see carry when they meet again later on this summer. They've already had 2 series in the books, and they got 2 more forthcoming. So that's going to be hotly contested when they revisit and reacquaint one another later on this year. So something just to keep in mind with that. Then you had Rafael Devers, who got traded, as we all know, last Sunday to San Francisco, and it just took 5 days for he and his former teammates to reconnect, where the Red Sox invaded the Bay Area, and the Red Sox got the first game to where Devers was hitless. But in the second game, Devers hits a home run, which proved to be vital as the Giants win 3-2. And although Devers got a hit yesterday, not much more damage after that, but the Giants prevailed, winning 2 out of 3 over the Red Sox throughout this past weekend. So Devers did get a home run. I don't know what the reception was. I'm sure his teammates, they hugged it out. I wasn't really following Giants, Red Sox over the weekend. I know Alex Cora had said some nice things about him on the way out the door in an interview I heard late last week prior to the Red Sox-Giants series, but nothing along the lines of that there was any, I'm not going to go as far as saying hatred, but maybe disconnect, or maybe there was a thing where, yeah, we wish him well, but that's it, just a wave and a salute. I'm sure there were probably some hugs around the batting cages and maybe amongst former teammates, but I didn't get a good sense of that or really was on top of that. So I'm sure somebody out there will get a better understanding and feel of that, but I'm think there's any animosity based on what Devers said and obviously what the manager said. So now he could say goodbye to that reunion, which was obviously very quick since the trade was consummated last Sunday. Then you have this scenario with the Brewer pitcher, Jacob Misiorowski, to where they shipped, and no big deal, Aaron Savali to the White Sox, so where Misiorowski only started his Major League Baseball career with 5 hitless innings against the St. Louis Cardinals before he got pulled with a hamstring or a cramp. And then in his next start, where he faced off against the Minnesota Twins in Minnesota, he started his first 6 innings perfect. So in 11 innings, he gave up no hits, but then in the bottom of the 7th, he gave up a walk and then a home run, which he finally gave up a hit to Matt Warner, the right fielder of the Twins. So at that point, he was pulled. But the Brewers, who have now won 4 in a row, and they shellacked the Twins over the weekend. They beat them, I believe, 17-6 there on Saturday, on top of, I believe it was a 9-0 win on Friday. Yesterday was 9-8. It was a little bit closer. But the Twins, who have been reeling here, as I talked about there on Thursday, and then the Brewers, who won 4 in a row but didn't gain much ground on the Cubs in the NL Central. But what a start for Misiorowski. Not since 1900 have you had a starter in his first 11 innings to not give up a hit. So now we have to keep an eye on this phenom and see how he pitches in his next start and beyond, because he has literally been lights out and unhittable. So congratulations to him on his just flying right out of the gate. Tremendous start in his career. So kudos to him. Then you have Kyle Raleigh, who is now threatening to maybe even take over Aaron Judge as the single-season all-time American League home run record winner. Well, he's already halfway there, and we've still got a full week of June to go. Wrigley Field, he hits 4 home runs. He's already had more home runs as a catcher before the All-Star break, which Johnny Bench did. I believe he hit, 29 back in 1970, to where he hit 45 that year. Well, Raleigh surpassed that, and now he's looking to threaten Ken Griffey Jr.'s mark of 34 home runs by the break, which I believe was in 94. So for Cal Raleigh, who has just literally been hitting the cover off the ball, monster weekend at Wrigley, and he's halfway to Aaron Judge now listen, is he going to get that? We'll have to wait and see, but he has literally been a guy that's been on a tear. And even though I said, 10 days ago, that just give the MVP award to Aaron Judge, well, Cal Raleigh is saying, wait, what about me? Now, listen, he's going to be in the running here, considering what he's done throughout this first half of the year, and the first half hasn't even concluded. So we do have to give him his just due. But even with Judge cooling off and his batting average precipitously dropping, and Raleigh, although hitting monster home run records as a catcher, but I still got to see more. And considering the demand of catching 9 innings and now getting into the dog days of summer and the dog days of August, will this continue? Right now, it's going to be tough to cool him off, but you would think because of the rigors of that position that he's going to eventually cool off and maybe hit anywhere between 45 to 55 home runs. If he's going to hit more than that, then he's going to be in the running for an MVP, and especially if the Mariners make the playoffs. Now, they're still, I believe, 4.5 games behind the Astros in the American League West, but you got to give it up for what he's done here, considering that he has certainly put himself in the name with Aaron Judge as being an MVP candidate, even though we haven't even reached the halfway point of the baseball season. We're getting close. A lot of teams have played 76, 77, 78 games, so by the time we get to the weekend, you're going to have teams that are already going to play that much. As it is right now, the Mariners have played 76 games. So by the time we get to next week, a lot of teams will already have passed the halfway mark of the season, and even then, that'll be June 30th. We won't even get to July where teams will be past the halfway point. And as we know, when we get to the All-Star break, a lot of teams will have already played about anywhere between 95 to 98 games. So let's see how Raleigh will continue his home run tear if he does. So we'll see what's going to go on with that. And then Shohei Ohtani had his second start, only 1 inning, but this time a lot better than the first go-around against the Padres, where he gave up a run on 2 hits in his opening start there last Monday. But then yesterday, 1 inning, got 2 strikeouts. I believe he threw, 18 pitches? Let me pull that up real quick. I believe maybe even less than that. I think he had 18 pitches, 10 strikes. including the 2 strikeouts. So for Ohtani there yesterday against the Washington Nationals, and mind you, the Nationals won 13-7, but they scored 13 runs in the 6th, 7th, and 8th innings. Ohtani yesterday in the 1 inning, yes, 18 pitches, had 12 strikes, not 10 as I mentioned before. So as he continues to build up his pitch count, his innings, etc., and as you get deeper into the summer, I would think by September he'll start pitching 5 innings or at least more, maybe even earlier than that. You would figure maybe sometime as you get to the early, middle part of August to build himself up for October. So Ohtani is certainly a lot better this time around than what we saw there in his opening start against San Diego. And let me take a look at look at the standings first. There's not much to really talk about, people, and I'll get into the wild card standings when we get to the middle of July, maybe even that first Monday, maybe 2 weeks from today, which will be July the 7th. I'll get to the wild card numbers because July 1st will be Tuesday and obviously next Monday. And despite the fact that we'll be past the halfway point, I'll get into more of the wild card and where these teams are at when we get to July 7th, which will be a week before the All-Star break. And then obviously we'll have it all broken down when we move it along here as far as teams that are going to be in the wild card mix. Then we'll have the trade deadline, which will be at the end of July. And before you know it, we're going to be in the throes of pennant races and everything else that's going to happen around the baseball season. Because now that the hockey and basketball season have exited stage, right, and even though with the draft in both sports and free agency and what's going to happen there, but once that dies down after the first few days of July, it is literally going to be baseball and nothing else. Yes, I understand you're going to have Wimbledon forthcoming, as well as the Open Championship as far as the golf, but other than that, it is going to be baseball day in and day out from now through the end of October. So keep that in mind. I understand the NFL and college football will usher them in when we get to the latter part of August into September. I can certainly wait for that, people, as you well know, but that's what we have as far as the sports landscape goes. And with the standings, it's pretty much status quo. Teams haven't really gotten closer or gotten behind. The Yankees, although did win 2 out of 3 against the Orioles over the weekend, but still have that 3.5 game lead over the Rays. The Central, we know the Tigers are still playing pretty well. It's actually 3 and a loss and 2.5 when it comes to the Rays and the Yanks. Tigers, good shape, 7 but 8.5 over the Guardians. We talked about Astros Mariners. We know the Phillies and Mets lie. Cubs Brewers the same. And then the Dodgers, 3 in the loss over San Francisco, 4 in the loss over San Diego, 3.5 and 5 games back respectively. And that's pretty much it with the standings as far as the divisions go. And your schedule for the week, we know about Mets Braves. Other series of note, Texas at Baltimore. Yankees are in Cincinnati to play the Reds. Arizona and the White Sox. Pittsburgh at Milwaukee. Seattle, Minnesota. Chicago at St. Louis. All right, that's not a bad series. St. Louis behind Milwaukee by the slimmest of margins, but still, if St. Louis is going to do any justice, let's see them sweep the Cubs. And I'll check to see if that's a 4-game series. Boston on their long road trip. Remember, they started in Seattle, went to San Francisco, now they'll be in Anaheim. Then you have the Athletics in Detroit before they make their way to New York to play the Yankees over the weekend. Toronto at Cleveland. Tampa at Kansas City. Philly at Houston. Good series there. NL East and AL West leaders. Rematch of the 2022 World Series. Far from it, but you get what I'm saying. Dodgers in Colorado. Washington and San Diego. Miami at San Francisco. That's pretty much your schedule there. And let me see if those games or some of those teams have 4-game schedules. Chicago, St. Louis, a 4-gamer. So if St. Louis wants to do any damage, you got to win 3 games. Because that means you'll gain 2 in the standings if that's the case. And right now, the Cardinals are currently 5 in the loss, 4.5 back. So if they gain 2 games, they'll be 2.5 back and 3 in a loss. So let's see what they could do here over the course of these 4 days. You know, I'll be on top of that as we move it along. And any other 4-game sets to speak of? Athletics Detroit is a 4-gamer right now. Toronto, Cleveland, Seattle. Yeah, a lot of these are 4-game series. But that's what you have there of note. That's what's with the baseball. Nothing else to discuss there. And quite honestly, people, NFL is quiet. Other sports, WNBA, I got to get a little bit more into. I know Caitlin Clark last week with the whole scuffle and a lot of things that gone on there, but I haven't really been on top of it. I know I said I'd be more on top of the WNBA now that I'm going to be watching game in and game out. And I know that they snapped the Liberty streak. I believe they started off 9-0 when Caitlin Clark coming back, and I believe she snapped that streak last Saturday, and then they had a game Sunday, and it all went haywire. But anyway, that is it, people. As we turn the corner, as sports will now start to get a little quieter, although it'll heat up, and you know that whatever is cracking in the sports universe, I'm going to deliver to you. So the Sports Dead Zone, Part 2, although not here just yet, because of what's going to transpire here this week with the drafts, and we have the rumors that are going to be about with the free agency period, and we're going to see how that's going to unfold. But NFL is going to be quiet. College football is going to be quiet. A lot of these sports now, the sun is set with the fall and winter, and it's going to be all baseball. But you know I'll be on top of it, so don't go anywhere. Even though it may die down a little bit, and it may be the Dead Zone 2.0, you know I'm going to be on top of anything and everything that's going to happen in the sports universe. So keep yourself on your podcast dial, wherever you listen to podcasts, or on the channel on YouTube, because you know I'm going to be coming at you fast and furious throughout the course of these summer months. And that'll do it, my good people. Another episode in the books. Thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the toy department of life called sports. And as I mentioned at the end of every podcast, please subscribe, rate, review. Live stream coming at you on Wednesday on YouTube. I may expand to my other social media accounts, so stay tuned for that on the channel as well. But a live stream, high noon, to talk about everything that's happening. You get at me live, go into the chat room. We'll banter back and forth. There's the one opportunity for you to get me, ask me, debate me, whatever it is. High noon Eastern time this Wednesday, and every Wednesday for that matter. So please subscribe to the YouTube channel as I implore you to do so. The little engine that could, as I try to continue to get to that 1,000 subscriber threshold. Right now I'm at 643, so slowly but surely, people, but I need your help. So if you could do so, subscribe, take a screenshot, send it to your family, friends, foes, frenemies, and to the casual, diehard, the kook, the good sports fan in your life. One more time, I'd appreciate it. When you take a screenshot, send it to my socials on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, or JAYREELZ on Instagram. Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just a number. And in the old-fashioned way, if you have a question, comment, or suggestion, the JAYREELZpodcast@gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do. This is why I quit my job, to do this full time. Not gaining a dime just yet, but that's what I'm trying to work it. And check my sponsors, my brand sponsorships that I have in the description on YouTube, on Apple, Spotify, etc. Because whatever it is that you can put forth, whether it's Olipop Soda or even better help for your mental health, I get a cut of that. So please check those links. You'll get 15% off on Olipop. You'll get 10% off for your first month on betterhelp.com/JAYREELZ. So please, people, if you could do your part, again, I'd be immensely grateful for all that you've done, your support, etc. Because sports is in the blood and the DNA. I also have lifestyle content coming on the channel, as well as critique vlogs. You name it, I got it all covered. Because as long as I'm sitting in front of this microphone and camera, I will continue to deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.